Hi, this is Robert with Space Age Consulting, and today we're going to be doing a comparison between the BZBGear 30X PTZ camera and my trusty tried and true PTZOptics 30X PTZ camera. So we actually decided to go on site. Right now we are using our PTZOptics on location at a site we do work with, a church that we do some work with. And so I wanted to compare that to the BZBGear PTZ camera. So if you just look at the specs, the two cameras are closely related. But as you dive deeper, can you find there any real differences between a camera that's at least 6 years old and one that's brand new? Let's go on site and check it out. Okay, so here I was on location testing out the BZBGear versus the PTZOptics camera. As I mentioned before, the PTZOptics camera I've had for quite a few years, and the BZBGear I'm really just testing out now. But I made a huge mistake. I recorded all this to the YOLO Box Pro as well as stream it to a private YouTube setting. I was testing out a couple of different things at once, so I wanted to test the streaming capabilities as well. I was actually streaming over Wi-Fi. Big problem. But I made a mistake. Inside the building was amazingly cold. They're having a heat issue right now. And so I was rushing to get things done. And I forgot to change a setting on the YOLO Box Pro, which is that the audio does not follow video. I have my Rode Wireless Go right here, and I was sending it directly to the YOLO Box Pro, but I forgot to change the setting within the YOLO Box Pro, so audio was following video, which you never really want to do in these circumstances. So right now, you will hear me start out. See, the good thing is with this, I don't have to go live. I'm going to go live just so I can see what it's like. And then, as I switch cameras, all right? And so their audio goes out. Now, it's faint in the background, so if I wanted to go through, I can raise the volume up. But let me just do this voiceover for now. So here is where, through the YOLO Box Pro, I'm testing the two cameras. This one is the, this camera is the BZBGear 30X NDI camera. And the one you originally saw with the lower saturation, this is the PTZOptics 30X NDI camera. And I was testing out the different movements between the two, testing out the motor. This is definitely the PTZOptics. You see as the colors are shifting, everything's set to auto on both cameras. So you have auto exposure, auto white balance, and auto focus. And the auto white balance, I'm not really a fan of it. So later on in this, I was going to make adjustments using the camera controls through the website to the camera themselves. All right. So I was just testing out the movement. Here is a side-by-side photo. On the left is the BZBGear. On the right is the PTZOptics. And you'll see sort of right out the box, there is much less satisfaction, much less saturation on the PTZOptics camera. That may be how I had it set for the work I'm doing, and I was going to make adjustments later on. So I'm just doing regular PTZ testing with the motors, just to see. Once again, you're talking about a camera. I bought the PTZOptics camera. It's got to be at least 5 years ago. And it's held up nicely over this time. But now compared to what's new on the market, there are a lot more PTZs in the same price range out on the market. And I'm just curious to see how they compare. I've used the PTZOptics on many events, professional events. It's not the best saturated camera. It doesn't have the best colors, but it works really well with very little light. All right, so I'm going to skip on ahead. This is a side-by-side shot. You'll notice the color difference. Now, saturation only covers one aspect of this. The other issue we have is look at, and I'll get a closer shot of this, but look at the PTZ optics and see if you notice anything. I just said it worked well in low light, and there's not great light in these old cathedral style buildings. But when I do a split screen, because the YOLO box is great at doing split screens, you'll notice a huge difference between color rendition and just graphical, the ability to create graphics. The ability to render video. Here I was testing out turning off the auto white balance. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, some of the problems I had. And here you see my audio again, and I'm just covering certain things. All right, this is the PTZ optics camera again. Do you see anything odd here? You see the blockiness? It looks like noise. There is texture in these cameras. There is texture in these banners, excuse me. But let's see which camera recreates that texture better. Let me go ahead and mute this track so it's not distracting. Here I was testing auto exposure versus not, and I did encounter some problems with the BZB Commander. That's what the PTZ controller is called, the BZBGear Commander, or it's BG Commander, excuse me. So with the BG Commander, some of the issues I noticed was as soon as you take off any of the auto features, it will change the setting immediately. But then when I try to make fine adjustments to it, I can only go so far. So I can either close the camera's iris completely, or I turn back on auto exposure, and then I get this. Once again, this is the PTZ optics camera. And here's where I set up the split screen. So we're going to go through this. I had it all lined up. Once again, BZBGear 30X and PTZ Optics 30X. So you'll see the saturation difference, the contrast difference between the two. So here's where I wanted to check out, and let's see if the white balance is the same. Look, the white balance is obviously different, even on auto. Both of them are still set to auto, but the white balance is different. So I went through, and this is the PTZ optics. I went through to white balance it, only to discover you cannot white balance the PTZ optics directly from the IP address on the camera. You can do that on the BZBGear, but you can't do it on the PTZ optics. I had to download the PTZ optics software to change around the white balance. So that took some time. We'll just scrub through this. I tried to do some color adjustments, saturation adjustments to get them as close as possible. But notice here, the detail that I'm getting from the BZBGear camera seems to be a lot better. Is it a contrast issue? Is it just the sensor is so much better with the newer camera? That should be the case, but is that always the case? I'm jumping ahead to the split screen. It's great that the YOLO Box Pro can do this split screen option, and I have the two side by side. You can adjust how thick the divider line is or the angle of the dividing line. But you'll see here that you get a better image. It's just more crisp without being overly sharp. Yes, it looks like a video camera. It does not look like a cinema camera, but it's not a cinema camera. So you're going to get the sharp edges, the sharp lines, the detail. The detail is good here, where you're missing detail here. And then you're getting a lot of noise in this. Now, the interesting thing is, these banners, this is a purple banner. It's not a blue banner. So there should be some color adjustments made, and I did try to go through within the system to do that. You'll see I'm making some adjustments. I'm making it more purple. I brought down, I changed the contrast a bit. I also made some adjustments to the saturation on the BZBGear. And it's just, yeah, it's a richer purple. It's the saturation on the PTZ optics was set really low. Now, there are two different types of settings, whereas you can only go to 60% saturation or over 100. I think it goes up to 130% saturation on the BZBGear, whereas on the PTZOptics it's just a number between 0 and 9, I believe. It's actually a sliding bar. But which camera, just from this shot alone, which camera would you take? I just like the detail that you get from this camera better than this camera. And then once you match it with the PTZOptics controller, I tried to make adjustments as much as possible. This is still too blue, I admit that. And while this is a much richer purple, but this is after I made some adjustments to the contrast here. But once again, you're still losing detail. It seems to be a bit muddy. Your lines it seems broken. Just for a few seconds, there's an option to turn it black and white on the PTZOptics. But look at the detail. You can actually see the etching in this banner. And I don't have the sharpness very high on this camera. I'm going to have to do a bit more testing before I send it back. But I really am enjoying this camera. Once again, this isn't a comparison to say the PTZOptics is terrible. As I've mentioned, I used it constantly on very important shoots. But what I do see is that there is a big difference between the PTZOptics and the BZBGear 30X NDI. We're zoomed in. I think this should be around 20X, maybe a bit higher than that. But look at the difference in detail you have. So I would say for this time frame at this price point, the BZBGear might be a good choice. It is definitely something to consider. Once I get back to the office, I'll have a good look and see which one is more realistic. And from the shots that I took, the BZBGear just looks more realistic. I still got to work on the colors, but from a standpoint of detail, sharpness without being overly sharp, the BZBGear does win. Look, there's still so much. It's because the gear is in two separate places that I have to do the tests in this manner, but I really wanted to do it out of a studio in a live environment to see what it would look like. And by that is, I'm actually using this equipment here. You see that I'm in the balcony of this church because this is really where we work from. So I do have some screenshots of the work environment and then the view that we're doing. Thanks for watching. Hey, I can't close yet. I'll do the wrap up at the studio. So for now, goodbye. So I was clearly able to see some differences between the two cameras. As I said, one is 6 years old, one is relatively new. And I've used my PTZOptics cameras in many different environments. I've been very satisfied with it. But is it time to upgrade? What do I get if I upgrade? And what's the price point I'm looking at? So moving forward, I know what choice I would make. While I've loved my PTZOptics 30X, it seems like the BZBGear just has a better view of the real world and much more detail. Sharpness without being overly sharp, and very good saturation. Still need to work out some of the colors, but with the proper color chart, I'm sure we can get that settled, dialed in just right. While it's not time to retire the PTZOptics, because I'm glad it works with the BZBGear PTZ Commander, the control surface, it might be relegated to less duty now that we're going to be using the BZBGear. I'd also like to reintroduce you to our podcast, UnWired. You can find it on unwired.buzzsprout.com. It's also streaming on most of the major platforms, and we cover a lot of information that we do here, but we also talk about a lot of computer issues, networking, security, as well as some good conversations with some industry leaders. So go ahead and check us out, UnWired the Podcast. It is at unwired.buzzsprout.com. Thanks for watching, and here's hoping you see me soon.